Imagine, for a moment, a place where the very air, well, it vibrates with the mission of healing, where trust is not just paramount, but absolutely foundational,
Hmm.
and where lives, hang in the balance with every single minute.
Right. The stakes couldn't be higher.
Now take that sanctuary, that place of hope, and imagine it transformed into a terrifying hunting ground,
Yeah.
where the very person sworn to save lives becomes a silent, methodical predator.
It's just chilling to even think about.
Today, we're embarking on a truly harrowing deep dive. We're looking into one of the most horrifying true crime cases in modern German history, the case of Niels Högel.
Ah, yes, Högel.
He's a figure often referred to with this chilling irony as the angel of death in a white coat.
A deeply unsettling nickname, given the reality.
But this isn't simply the story of a single monstrous individual, as shocking as his actions were.
No, it goes much deeper than that.
No, what makes this deep dive particularly disturbing, I think, is how it meticulously unearths the layers of systemic indifference, deeply ingrained fear,
Mm-hmm.
and a terrifying wall of silence that allowed one man to claim hundreds of lives over years.
And that's what makes the material we've gathered so compelling, isn't it? It doesn't just chronicle Högel's horrific acts.
Right.
It unflinchingly exposes the profound institutional failures that, well, in essence, they created the conditions for him to operate.
They enabled him.
Effectively, yes. It compels us to ask a crucial, uncomfortable question. How could something of this magnitude happen? And perhaps even more perplexing, why did it continue for so long, seemingly unchecked?
Yeah, why didn't anyone stop it sooner? So our mission today is to guide you through the complex, chilling timeline of events.
Okay.
We'll try to explore the disturbing psychology of this killer, witness the tireless, often agonizing fight for justice waged by the victims' families.
Really important part of the story.
Absolutely. And ultimately, we need to confront the uncomfortable questions about accountability that still resonate powerfully, not just in Germany, but really everywhere today.
It has implications far beyond borders.
This is a truly shocking story. So, okay, let's unpack it piece by chilling piece. Let's transport ourselves back. It's 1999. We're at the Oldenburg Clinic in Lower Saxony, Germany. Picture a modern, bustling intensive care unit, an ICU.
High-pressure environment.
Exactly. This isn't just any hospital ward. It's a high-stakes place where the line between life and death is razor thin. Every decision is critical.
Immense pressure on the staff.
Immense, working tirelessly to preserve human life. Into this demanding, often chaotic world stepped Niels Högel.
And on the surface.
On the surface, he appeared to be the quintessential ideal candidate for a nursing position. Young, outwardly competent, seemed to exude this almost boundless enthusiasm.
Yeah, ticked all the boxes, you might say.
Right, he came from a family deeply rooted in the medical profession. His father was a nurse. His grandmother had also been a nurse.
So nursing was in his blood, seemingly.
Seemingly. Högel himself described his childhood back in Wilhelmshaven as protected, free from violence or major trauma.
Which sounds pretty normal, stable.
Exactly. This background, on paper, seemed to perfectly justify his career choice. It painted a picture of someone destined for empathy, dedication, caring for the sick.
He was, to all outward appearances, a model professional.
Totally.
But it wasn't long, perhaps surprisingly so, before his colleagues began to notice something, well, profoundly unsettling.
Oh, what kind of thing?
It was this peculiar, recurring pattern that at first glance seemed almost heroic.
Heroic. How so?
Högel was always, and I mean always, at the very epicenter of every crisis. When a patient would suddenly go into cardiac arrest, triggering that urgent blue code signal,
Yeah, alarm.
he was invariably the first to rush in. He moved with this decisive, almost preternatural skill, acting with a level of confidence and speed that impressed everyone around him.
Okay, so he looked like he knew what he was doing.
Very much so. He often seemed to single-handedly pull patients back from the brink of death.
Right. So this extraordinary zeal, this almost theatrical dedication to resuscitation, that's what earned him that unsettling nickname among his peers, Resuscitation Rambo.
Reanimation's a Rambo.
It sounds almost like a compliment, doesn't it? A hero in a white coat.
And that's the insidious part of it. That nickname, born in those intense, high-pressure corridors of the ICU, became Högel's perfect, impenetrable mask.
How so?
It wasn't merely a description of his behavior. It actively created and powerfully reinforced a heroic narrative around him.
I see.
A narrative that, tragically, effectively suppressed any budding suspicion. His colleagues, often exhausted, genuinely impressed by his perceived selflessness, his quick thinking.
Right, they're seeing him save people.
Exactly. They unconsciously helped him construct this facade of a tireless savior.
Wow.
This created a profound cognitive trap for everyone around him. Human beings were wired to find patterns, and when we encounter something that contradicts an established belief, especially one reinforced by the group, our minds often work to reinterpret the contradictory information.
To make it fit.
Precisely. In Högel's case, their minds were actively reinterpreting potentially alarming data to fit the comforting savior narrative. Any statistical anomaly, any suspicious coincidence.
Like more deaths on his shifts.
Exactly. Like a higher number of sudden resuscitations or patient deaths occurring specifically during his shifts. It was easily explained away.
How?
Well, of course there were more crises when Rambo was on duty because he was the one who could handle the pressure, the one who rushed in to save everyone.
Wow, that's chilling logic.
It's normalcy bias, isn't it? This psychological tendency to downplay or ignore warning signs because they don't fit our expected reality. It allowed him to operate with chilling impunity.
Because his colleagues' perceptions were so effectively manipulated by this heroic image.
Completely. His true murderous intentions were virtually unnoticed.
It's terrifying to consider how a reputation, even a seemingly positive one, can blind an entire team to the horrifying truth unfolding right before their eyes.
It truly is a chilling testament to how powerful perception can be. This heroic facade was absolutely crucial in the early days.
Setting the stage.
Yeah, laying the groundwork for his future crimes. It gave him the psychological cover he desperately needed. It was only much later, as the horrifying truth slowly began to seep out.
Then the perception shifted.
Dramatically. That's when far more sinister nicknames emerged, like Sensen Högel, which translates to Högel the Reaper.
Högel the Reaper. Stark contrast.
A complete, horrific shift in perception. But in the beginning, he was seen as this guardian angel in a white coat, whose presence paradoxically seemed to bring hope.
But in reality
Brought nothing but death.
So the truly horrifying series of murders in Oldenburg, they actually began in February 2000.
Right at the start of the new millennium.
And it didn't take long for alarming statistics to start accumulating, right there, within the walls of the Oldenburg Clinic.
The numbers started telling a story.
They did.
Yeah.
By August 2001, just about a year and a half into his tenure, the situation had become, well, undeniably clear. Doctors and nursing staff in the cardiothoracic ICU, specifically Unit 211, they held a special, hushed meeting to discuss the disturbing pattern they were collectively observing.
Okay, so people were noticing, talking internally.
Yes, and the data they presented was stark. A staggering 58% of all resuscitations and deaths during that period occurred specifically during Niels Högel's shifts.
58%. That's not random.
Not at all. The mortality rate in that single unit was, without question, abnormally high. That's the phrase used in later reports. There was this quiet, suppressed concern, a growing unease.
Rippling through the staff.
Exactly, though few dared to voice it explicitly, apparently.
And Högel, how did he react?
Well, Högel, with this almost uncanny intuition, maybe sensing that the net was tightening or that he was under scrutiny,
Yeah.
he immediately took 3 weeks sick leave right after this pivotal meeting.
Convenient timing.
Extremely. And the impact of his absence was dramatic, immediate, and chillingly direct.
What happened?
During those 3 weeks he was gone, only 2 patients died in the entire unit.
Only 2 compared
to the previous rate.
Whoa.
A massive, undeniable reduction. A stark, flashing red light that honestly, to any objective observer, should have demanded immediate drastic action.
You'd think so. That's pretty damning evidence right there. Should have triggered alarms everywhere.
You'd absolutely think that would be enough for a full-scale internal investigation, maybe even bringing in law enforcement, wouldn't you?
One would certainly hope so. Logic dictates it. But despite these glaring facts, despite the quiet conversations and that growing unease, a pervasive wall of silence, a Mauer des Schweigens, and what's been described as collective amnesia, took firm hold within the clinic's administration.
Collective amnesia. People just forgot.
Or chose to forget. Later, during the trials, witnesses recounted how any suspicions, no matter how well-founded, were simply waved away or actively dismissed by management.
Why? What were the reasons for that?
Well, the reasons for this tragic inaction, this profound organizational paralysis, were complex, multi-layered, really.
Okay.
Firstly, there was this palpable, overriding fear of damaging the prestigious clinic's reputation.
The image.
Exactly. A scandal of this magnitude, immense financial losses, severe erosion of public trust, a devastating blow to their standing.
Right.
Secondly, there was more individual fear among staff. Fear of being accused of mobbing, workplace bullying if they spoke up too forcefully against a colleague, especially a popular one.
Okay, that makes sense, sadly.
It creates a chilling disincentive for whistleblowers, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Thirdly, the chronic staff shortages and the constant intense stress in ICUs.
The pressure cooker environment.
Right. It created an environment where it was just easier or maybe felt safer to ignore anomalies than to launch a thorough disruptive investigation.
Easier to look away.
And perhaps most tragically, most fundamentally, there was this profound failure of imagination. Medical professionals operating within this deeply ingrained framework of trust, care, healing.
They couldn't believe it.
They simply could not conceive that one of their own, a fellow caregiver, could actually be a cold-blooded serial killer. This cognitive dissonance, this inability to reconcile the unthinkable with their reality.
And they rationalized it.
Actively overlooked or rationalized what should have been undeniable evidence. Classic groupthink. A desire for conformity trumping ethical duties.
So management's actions weren't just passive inaction like an oversight. They actively, knowingly enabled his future murders.
Precisely. They essentially became silent accomplices to what was to come.
Now,
The leadership at Oldenburg didn't just fail to act. Their steps were calculated, driven primarily by this desperate desire to avoid scandal at all costs.
so instead of calling the police,
Instead of an official investigation, instead of alerting law enforcement, they struck a deeply cynical deal with Högel. They offered him a choice. Either a transfer to a logistics department, no patient contact whatsoever, effectively isolating him,
Okay.
or resignation from his position with 3 months' salary paid in advance, and incredibly, a brilliant letter of recommendation.
A brilliant recommendation. After all that.
Unbelievable, isn't it? Högel, predictably, chose the latter. He knew the value of that document.
And this brilliant recommendation letter, Högel himself later described it, didn't he? With just this chilling lack of remorse.
He called it cynical, brazen, and false. And it was signed by both the director of care and the clinic head.
Wow. What did it say?
It painted this picture of him as sensible, conscientious, and independent. Someone who treated patients sensitively with understanding and care, praised his high level of self-reflection and outstanding professional knowledge.
That's just jaw-droppingly dishonest.
Utterly. This falsified document, created explicitly to protect one hospital's reputation by sweeping a terrifying secret under the rug,
Knowingly transferred a deadly threat.
directly to another medical institution. The future deaths in Delmenhorst were, therefore, a direct, predictable consequence of Oldenburg management's horrifying and morally bankrupt decisions.
So, armed with this glowing yet utterly false recommendation, Niels Högel just seamlessly transitioned to a new hunting ground.
Yep. Started work at the Delmenhorst Clinic on December 15, 2002.
And chillingly, it didn't even take a full week before he resumed his horrifying practice.
Almost immediately.
The consequences were immediate and catastrophic.
Yeah.
During his tenure there, the number of deaths in the clinic actually doubled.
The statistics, again, were undeniable, screamed for attention.
By 2005, a shocking 73% of all fatalities in that unit were linked directly to his shifts.
73%. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a clear pattern of murder.
A horrifying, almost identical replay of what happened in Oldenburg.
Exactly. Colleagues in Delmenhorst started noticing the same alarming signs. This macabre déjà vu.
Like what?
Sudden, inexplicable spikes in emergencies, excessive, unwarranted use of powerful resuscitation drugs. And Högel's constant, almost omnipresent presence at the bedside of every patient who was critical or dying.
Always there.
Always there. Suspicions mounted among the nursing staff grew into hushed whispers, but once again, management displayed what can only be described as criminal blindness.
They didn't react, even with clear evidence.
They failed to react even when glaring, undeniable evidence emerged, like, for instance, the discovery of 4 empty ampules of gilloritmal.
What's gilloritmal?
It's a powerful heart drug. And these empty ampules were found in the trash where Högel worked, even though the drug wasn't prescribed to anyone in the unit at the time.
That should have been an immediate, massive red flag.
Absolutely. Should have triggered an immediate alarm, but it didn't.
So what kind of drugs was he actually using? How did he manage to turn medications designed to save lives into, well, murder weapons?
He employed a terrifying array of potent drugs. He knew his pharmacology, cynically so. He'd intentionally administer excessive doses to induce sudden cardiac arrest or a drastic, fatal drop in blood pressure.
To create the crisis.
Exactly. Then, in his perverse narcissistic game, he'd relish the process of attempting to resuscitate them, performing CPR or giving other drugs. Playing the hero.
His choice of drugs showed deep knowledge then. A misuse of his skills.
A terrifying misuse. He knew precisely which substances would induce the desired effect to create his crisis.
Can you give us some specific examples? What was in his sort of killer's pharmacy?
Absolutely. He used powerful antiarrhythmics like gilaritimol, which contains adrenaline, that could cause life-threatening cardiac arrhythmia and a sharp drop in blood pressure.
Okay.
Also things like Sodalex, Sotalol, another antiarrhythmic beta blocker doing similar things. Xylocaine, lidocaine, anesthetic and antiarrhythmic, could cause circulatory collapse. Cordyrex, amiodarone, another antiarrhythmic.
It's mostly hard drugs.
Mostly, but also even basic electrolytes, misused horribly. Concentrated potassium and calcium chloride, in high doses, those can directly induce cardiac arrest.
Just basic substances, weaponized.
Precisely. He meticulously selected drugs to create the dramatic, life-threatening scenarios he craved, then stood by to save the patient.
Turning ICUs
into his personal hunting grounds. Each patient entrusted to his care became a potential victim in what you could only call his macabre game of God.
where he controlled life and death.
Just to feed his own distorted ego. It's horrifying.
So Niels Högel's horrifying 5-year reign of terror.
Mm.
It finally came to an end in June 2005.
After years of killing.
Yes. And not through some big systemic review, but thanks to the exceptional vigilance and courage of one colleague. A nurse, identified as Renate T.
One person finally broke through the silence.
It seems so. The pivotal incident unfolded between June 22nd and 24th at Delmenhorst. This observant nurse noticed Högel acting suspiciously near a patient whose life support machine was, inexplicably, off.
Suspicious.
Her suspicion deepened when she then found empty ampules of unprescribed drugs in the trash can nearby.
Same pattern. Empty ampules.
Exactly. And crucially, without hesitation, acting purely on instinct, she immediately took a blood sample from that patient.
Smart move. Critical.
Absolutely. That seemingly small, immediate action would later become a key, undeniable piece of evidence improving his crimes.
And yet, even at this critical juncture, with direct, undeniable evidence literally in their hands, the system failed. Again, displaying its tragic ingrained paralysis, clinic management, informed of the incident, presented with physical evidence. They hesitated for 2 agonizing days before taking decisive action.
2 days, while he was still working.
Yes. This fatal delay, a true dereliction of duty, allowed Högel to finish his shift. And in that time, he managed to kill his final victim.
Oh my God. Another preventable death.
Another preventable death staining the clinic's record. He was finally arrested in the summer of 2005.
But the initial legal response when it finally came was incredibly mild, wasn't it? Almost unbelievably so.
Strikingly, shockingly mild. The initial investigation, the charges, they focused on only one specific case, an attempted murder.
Just one. Despite the clear patterns.
Just one initially. The true, horrifying scale of his crimes remained completely hidden in the shadows, perhaps willfully ignored.
So what was his first sentence?
His first conviction in December 2006 was for a surprisingly lenient 5 years in prison, plus a temporary professional ban.
5 years for attempted murder after all this.
Yes. It wasn't until an appeal in 2008 that the sentence was increased, but only to 7.5 years. And the professional ban was made lifelong then.
Still seems incredibly light.
Strikingly mild, as reports called it. Bordering on negligible, given what would later be uncovered. It really showed how little the justice system at that point truly understood the nature of the person they were dealing with.
Or how unwilling they were to grasp the enormity of it.
Perhaps.
So the full horror was still largely unknown then. It took years, almost a decade, for the true scale to emerge. How did that finally happen?
It did. The true magnitude only began to fully unravel in 2014, almost a decade after his initial arrest.
Wow, what triggered it?
It was largely due to the relentless, unwavering pressure from the victims' families. They simply refused to believe their loved ones died naturally. They dismissed the official narratives.
Good for them. They kept fighting.
Their persistence, their sheer will, finally forced a new, much larger investigation. A special commission aptly named SOCO-Cardio.
SOCO-Cardio for heart-related investigations.
Exactly. Was formed. This team embarked on what can only be described as a titanic, almost unimaginable effort to uncover the truth.
Titanic effort.
Police Chief Arne Schmidt later characterized the number of victims they eventually uncovered as unique in the history of the Federal Republic of Germany, an unprecedented scale of murder by a single perpetrator in peacetime.
That sounds like an incredibly complex, exhaustive, and just emotionally taxing investigation. Years long. Can you describe the scope?
Truly unprecedented in scale, in emotional difficulty, required immense dedication from the investigators. For 3 grueling years, Soko Cardio meticulously reviewed over 200 suspicious deaths.
200.
And the scope went far beyond Germany's borders. An astonishing 134 bodies were exhumed from 67 different cemeteries.
Exhumed. Wow.
Not just in Germany, but also in Poland and Turkey, following the paths of victims who'd been repatriated for burial.
That's incredible detective work.
It was a desperate race against time and decomposition. In many cases, the decay was too advanced to detect any drug traces.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. No definitive proof.
Immense frustration, a haunting sense of unfinished business for the police and the families. And perhaps most tragically, another 101 potential victims from Delmenhorst could never be definitively verified.
Oh, no.
Because their bodies had been cremated, forever leaving the true number of those killed unknown. A shadow that still hangs over this case.
It's truly chilling to trace the escalation of that body count as the investigation progressed. It really cemented Högel's status as Germany's most prolific post-war serial killer.
And numbers are just staggering.
Probable first murder in Oldenburg. February 2000. His Oldenburg spree, 99 to 2002. Investigations pointed to 36-plus murders.
And that internal meeting in August 2001 clearly showed the anomalies yet.
Yet nothing was done effectively. He transferred to Delmenhorst in December 2002, armed with that cynical recommendation.
Right.
And his spree there, 2002 to 2005, led to more than 50 murders.
Then the arrest in June 2005, that initial mild conviction in December 2006 for just one attempt.
Sentence increased slightly in 2008, but still only 7.5 years. The full horror still cloaked.
Until Soko Cardio's work, 2014 to 2017, that peeled back the layers.
In his second trial, 2014-2015, he confessed to 30 murders, right? Though only 6 were proven then.
Yes, the confession started, but proving them was another matter.
Then, August 2017, police make that truly shocking announcement. 90 proven murders.
A huge jump.
By November 2017, it climbed to 106.
Kept growing.
And in his third largest trial, 2018-2019, 85 murders definitively proven, though he was accused of 100.
It's a grim, almost incomprehensible progression. Just unimaginable suffering.
And this monumental systemic failure, where so many warning signs were ignored for so long, it even led to a subsequent trial for clinic managers, didn't it?
Yes, though shockingly, that only began as recently as February 2022. Years later.
It's crucial, as we talk about these grim statistics, these numbers, to always remember that behind every single number lay real human beings, real lives, profound tragedy.
Absolutely. They weren't just statistics.
No. And this isn't just about a monstrous killer. It's equally a powerful and frankly inspiring story about the people who refused to be silenced to the families of the victims.
Their fight was incredible.
A central figure in their relentless, often lonely fight for justice became Christian Marbach.
Ah, yes, Marbach, his grandfather.
His grandfather, Isidor Marbach, was one of Högel's many victims. And that personal tragedy, that deep, raw grief, it transformed Marbach into this tireless, formidable advocate for all affected families.
Channeled his grief into action.
Exactly. His journey, from profound personal loss to public advocacy, truly embodies the fight, not just against the killer himself, but just as fiercely against the very system, the institutions that had covered for him and enabled him for so long.
He refused to let his grandfather's death be just another statistic.
He absolutely did.
And these families, they endured a double traumatization, didn't they? A compounded suffering that's almost impossible to fully grasp.
How so?
First, their loved ones were murdered in a place of supposed safety by the very person sworn to heal and protect them. That betrayal of trust. It's unfathomable.
Just devastating.
But then, to compound their agony, they were confronted with chilling indifference, stonewalling, outright lies from the medical institutions.
The hospitals themselves.
Yes, the ones that, for years, actively concealed the truth, all to protect their own reputations and avoid scandal.
So their battle was on two fronts.
Exactly. A two-front war against Högel and against that impenetrable, infuriating wall of silence that protected him, making the institutions themselves complicit in their suffering.
Imagine being told your loved one died naturally when your gut screams otherwise, and then having to fight for years just to prove it.
The strength that must have taken.
Christian Marbach's words, after Högel's final sentencing, really illustrate this deeper systemic battle. He stated, "With this weary but determined resolve,
What did he say?
we are finished with the accused. Now we can hold those accountable who made his crimes possible."
Wow, that perfectly captures it, doesn't it? The shift in focus. They understood Högel was just one piece of a much larger broken puzzle.
Exactly.
And the pain for these families was further exacerbated by the agony of uncertainty, a torment that lingered for years.
So,
Högel's selective memory during the trials. He'd confessed to some murders but claimed no recollection of others. That, coupled with 15 acquittals due to lack of irrefutable evidence.
often because of cremation or decomposition.
Right. It left so many questions tragically unanswered. For many, like Frank Brinker, whose father was a probable but unproven victim, the trial brought no relief, no closure.
Just bitterness.
Only a very, very bitter taste of lingering doubt and injustice. Lawyer Gabi Lubin, who represented many families, she spoke movingly about relatives who simply couldn't live with the gnawing thought that their sister or mother might have been murdered, yet it was impossible to prove in court.
That lack of definitive answers must have been torture, adding another layer to their grief.
Immeasurable,
Yeah.
preventing them from truly moving forward.
So in their profound need to honor the dead, create tangible places for remembrance, for mourning, the families, driven by Marbach's leadership, initiated the creation of these powerful memorials.
Places to remember and maybe to warn.
Exactly. In Delmenhorst, a memorial stone was carefully placed, trees were planted as a living tribute, a symbol of life enduring amidst tragedy. The Oldenburg Clinic, years later, also established a profound and evocative memorial. It's called the Salvation Bells, or Rettungsglocken.
Salvation bells. Tell me about that.
It's this striking composition. It features 5 silent concrete bells, standing stoically as an eternal symbol for the memory of the deceased.
Silent for the dead.
Right. And 1 bronze bell, which visitors can ring, as a powerful resonant symbol of the inalienable responsibility of the living to prevent such horrors from recurring.
A call to vigilance.
Precisely. These memorials stand not only as sacred places of remembrance and mourning, but also as a silent yet potent accusation, a reproach to a system that ignored the voices and the suffering of its victims for so long.
A constant reminder that these weren't just numbers, but lives stolen, and that collective failure has a lasting physical consequence. During the course of the various trials, forensic psychologists, psychiatrists, they made these concerted efforts to dissect and understand the complex, truly chilling psychology of Niels Högel.
What did they find? What kind of person could do this?
Their conclusions painted a stark portrait, an individual utterly devoid of fundamental human qualities like shame, empathy, genuine remorse.
No empathy at all.
Apparently not. Psychiatrists ultimately diagnosed him with a combined personality disorder, characterized by pronounced narcissistic, dissocial, and obsessive traits.
Okay, break that down. What does that mean in practical terms?
It means he was utterly self-absorbed, grandiose sense of his own importance, a blatant disregard for the rights or feelings of others, prone to rigid patterns of thought and behavior,
You saw patients
as mere objects for his manipulation, pawns in his twisted game, not as vulnerable human beings.
That's terrifying.
Oh.
And what about his notorious ability to deceive, to manipulate? That allowed him to operate undetected for so long.
Right, that's where Professor Max Steller comes in, a leading forensic psychologist who analyzed Högel extensively.
Okay, what did Steller find?
Steller concluded that Högel possessed an extraordinary competence to lie, Lügenkompetenz in German, and an equally strong readiness to lie, Lügenbereitschaft.
He wasn't just a liar, he was good at it.
Exceptionally good. Capable of crafting high-quality lies, meticulously constructed fabrications that allowed him to systematically deceive colleagues, management, even seasoned investigators for years. This pathological deception was absolutely central to his modus operandi, the bedrock of his ability to operate undetected, almost in plain sight.
But despite these personality disorders, was he considered legally responsible?
Yes, absolutely. All the experts, including Professor Sass, unanimously declared him fully culpable, voll schuldfähig, meaning he was fully aware of his actions, understood their dire consequences, and could have chosen to act otherwise.
So these weren't impulsive acts.
No, his crimes were not the result of some psychotic break or an uncontrollable impulse. They were conscious, planned, chillingly cold-blooded choices. This conclusion was decisive in his sentencing. Life imprisonment, no possibility of parole.
So the chilling question remains, what drove him? What drove a nurse, someone sworn to heal, to protect, to become one of history's most horrifying serial killers?
Well, Högel himself, in court, offered this disturbingly mundane explanation, claimed his actions were driven by sheer boredom.
Boredom, seriously.
That's what he claimed. But the extensive psychological analysis reveals a much deeper, far more disturbing truth.
Which is?
He was profoundly drawn to the adrenaline rush, the high, the sheer euphoria he felt by orchestrating a life-or-death crisis situation, actively inducing it himself, and then, immediately afterward, dramatically playing the role of the savior.
He liked the drama.
He thrived on it. One expert chillingly referred to him as an extreme king of drama, someone who was happy in crisis.
Happy in crisis. That phrase just encapsulates his pathology, doesn't it? His twisted satisfaction.
It really does. The ultimate overarching goal of this deadly spectacle was recognition, admiration, a perverse sense of power.
You wanted to be seen as a hero.
Desperately, he sought to impress colleagues with his seemingly exceptional resuscitation skills, to be seen as a hero, a savior who could turn the tide of death.
So each resuscitation, even failed ones,
Served as powerful narcissistic fuel, affirming his distorted self-image as someone indispensable, someone who commanded life and death. The deaths of patients, in his terrifying view,
or just acceptable losses.
merely collateral damage in his pathological pursuit of self-affirmation and attention. Their lives were simply expendable.
And his behavior even had striking parallels with a known psychological phenomenon, didn't it? But on a massive scale.
Yes, exactly. Högel's behavior showed striking parallels to Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
Where a caregiver makes someone sick for attention.
Right, where a caregiver intentionally induces illness in a dependent person, often a child, to gain attention, sympathy, or control. Högel effectively implemented this syndrome on an industrial murderous scale, using entire hospital wards as his stage.
Wow. And how did his motives compare to other so-called angels of death?
It's important to distinguish. For example, the American nurse Charles Cullen, who may have killed up to 400 patients. He sometimes claimed he acted out of a distorted sense of mercy.
A claim most experts doubt.
Right. Largely considered false and self-serving. Högel's motives, however, were far more transparently egocentric. Pure narcissism, a chilling thirst for thrills, an insatiable desire for recognition.
No pretense of compassion.
None whatsoever, only self-gratification.
So during his final, largest trial, 2018-2019, he displayed this manipulative mastery again, didn't he? Proving Professor Steller's assessment of his Lugan competence.
He really did. On the very first day, he confessed to 43 murders.
Okay.
However, in the very same breath, he outright denied involvement in 5 others and, incredibly, claimed to have no memory whatsoever of the remaining 52 episodes.
Selective amnesia. That sounds suspicious.
Immediately raised deep suspicions. Professor Steller noted it was highly unusual, almost unheard of, for a serial killer to forget their very first murder.
Right. You'd think that would stick.
Exactly, leading Steller to strongly speculate that Högel might have begun his killing spree even earlier than the first documented case in February 2000, creating this even darker shadow of unconfirmed victims.
So the court was in this truly bizarre, almost paradoxical position. The main evidence in many cases was the confession of a man whom the experts called a first-class liar. How do they navigate that? Discerning truth from deception.
It was a significant, unprecedented challenge, required forensic sophistication. But once again, Professor Steller's testimony proved crucial.
How so?
Despite Högel's undeniable, almost pathological capacity for deception, Steller testified that his confessions to the murders, when they occurred, had a discernible, convincing weight.
Remember Sorghum's there.
Convincing weight.
And showed no signs of being false. Steller's expertise allowed the court to differentiate between Högel's genuine admissions and his cynical attempts to mislead or deny. He could sort of discern the genuine from the fabricated.
Okay.
Högel concluded his court appearances with apologies, addressed directly to the victims' families. A final, chilling act of performance.
What did he say?
He said, "I would like to sincerely apologize for everything I have done to you over the years," and added, "I am truly very sorry."
But given his diagnosis, his lack of empathy.
Exactly. Given his clinically diagnosed lack of empathy and his proven history of manipulation, those words just rang hollow for many in the courtroom.
Another performance. To them, it seemed like just another calculated part of his cold-blooded performance. A final, chilling manipulation from a man seemingly incapable of genuine remorse or understanding the depth of suffering he'd inflicted.
The case of Niels Högel, is just so much more than the story of one monster, however depraved he was. It really is a damning indictment of the system.
Absolutely. The institutions that allowed him to operate.
Allowed him to operate with chilling impunity for 5 long years.
Mm.
In both Oldenburg and Delmenhorst clinics, there wasn't just negligence. There was this pervasive culture of turning a blind eye.
Kultur des Wegschauens.
Right. This was a deep-seated institutional problem where numerous colleagues, superiors, they ignored obvious, glaring warning signs.
Actively dismissed mounting suspicions.
And tragically took absolutely no action to stop the killer, essentially becoming unwilling enablers.
The prosecutors and experts, when they analyzed this profound institutional failure, they identified several key intertwining reasons for this deafening, deadly silence.
What were they?
Firstly, this intense, almost paralyzing fear of damaging the clinic's reputation.
Always the reputation.
A scandal of this magnitude, a serial killer under their roof, could mean devastating financial losses, catastrophic erosion of trust, a severe blow to their standing.
Right. What else?
Secondly, individuals feared legal repercussions or being accused of mobbing a colleague if they spoke up too forcefully, especially against someone seen as a hero.
The whistleblower disincentive.
Exactly. Thirdly, chronic staff shortages, the constant intense stress in ICUs, that pressure cooker environment.
Made it easier to look away.
It created an environment where it was just easier or felt safer to ignore anomalies, rationalize away disturbing patterns, rather than launch a thorough disruptive investigation that adds more burden.
Okay. And the last reason.
Perhaps the most tragic, fundamentally human reason, that profound failure of imagination. Medical professionals operating in this framework of trust, care, healing
Couldn't conceive of it.
simply could not believe one of their own could be a cold-blooded serial killer. This cognitive dissonance, the clash between the unthinkable reality and their professional identity, meant they actively overlooked or rationalized what should have been undeniable evidence.
Classic organizational groupthink.
A denial.
A collective desire for normalcy, avoiding discomfort, superseded ethical duties, even basic human protection. This toxic mix of fear, misplaced corporate loyalty, and profound psychological denial created the ideal, fertile conditions for Högel to continue unhindered.
So in 2022, the focus of accountability shifted dramatically, away from Högel himself, towards the broader system that enabled him.
Right. 7 former managers from both clinics, high-ranking doctors, head nurses, the former CEO found themselves on trial.
Facing charges related to murder or attempted murder by inaction.
Yes. The central, agonizing question for the families, for society, was, who else beyond Högel was truly responsible? Who else bears the burden of accountability?
And the verdict.
The verdict, delivered in October 2022, sent shockwaves. All the accused were astonishingly acquitted. Acquitted. All of them.
All of them. What made it even more startling was that, by the end, even the prosecution had reluctantly requested their acquittal.
The prosecution asked for acquittal. Why?
The chief prosecutor explicitly stated that while massive errors had undoubtedly been made and the accused had taken on guilt in a moral and professional sense, this guilt was not judicial, not justiciable in a criminal sense.
Okay, what's the distinction there? Moral guilt versus judicial guilt.
This verdict exposed a deep, troubling chasm between moral responsibility and criminal guilt in German law. To secure a conviction for murder or attempted murder, the court needed to prove intent, Vorsatz.
Intent.
Meaning the managers knew Högel was killing patients and consciously allowed it to continue or even actively supported it. The court concluded it could not prove this extremely high standard of intent beyond a reasonable doubt.
Despite all the warning signs, the statistics.
Despite the overwhelming circumstantial evidence of negligence, they couldn't prove that specific, conscious intent to let murder happen. The presiding judge explicitly stated no criminal acts were detected.
And lesser charges, like negligence.
Already time-barred, due to legal limitations on when such charges can be brought, even providing that falsified recommendation letter.
Yeah.
The court ruled that didn't create a direct legal duty to protect future victims in a way that would incur criminal liability.
So the legal system, designed mainly to punish individual crimes with direct intent, it proved utterly incapable of holding accountable those whose collective inaction, negligence, corporate self-preservation enabled mass murder.
Precisely, a profound limitation of the law. The concept of the guilt of others, the responsibility of those who enable rather than directly commit atrocities, remained legally unpunished here.
A sobering demonstration.
Well, very much so. How the existing legal framework struggled to address systemic failures where direct criminal intent by multiple actors couldn't be definitively proven. It highlights a critical blind spot.
Especially when that failure of imagination prevents clear intent from being established.
Exactly. The system, in essence, protected itself.
The case of Niels Högel left this incredibly deep, indelible scar on German society, and profoundly on its healthcare system.
Understandably so. The trust was shattered.
In response to this horrific tragedy, legislative changes were finally enacted, aimed at preventing such a disaster from ever recurring.
What kind of changes?
In 2019, Lower Saxony's hospital law was significantly amended, specifically aimed at strengthening oversight mechanisms and, crucially, encouraging mandatory reporting of suspicious cases without fear of reprisal.
Making it safer to speak up.
Hopefully. The Delmenhorst Clinic itself, shattered by the events, implemented rigorous new protocols, including a qualified postmortem examination, a four eyes principle.
Four eyes principle.
Yeah, involving a forensic medic in addition to the attending physician, specifically to prevent concealment of unnatural deaths and ensure thorough scrutiny.
Okay, those reforms sound vital, a step in the right direction.
Definitely. However, despite these legislative and procedural changes, the haunting question posed by many experts, former colleagues, the families, it remains. Can something similar happen again?
And the answer?
The answer from many of them, from those on the front lines of healthcare and investigation, is a frightening, unequivocal yes.
A frightening yes. That's sobering.
It really is.
Why do they say yes after all the changes?
Because persistent systemic problems continue to plague healthcare systems, globally, not just in Germany.
Like what?
Issues like chronic staff shortages, intense pressure to cut costs, the fundamental vulnerability of patients. They create environments ripe for exploitation.
The same pressures that existed before.
Exactly. When staff are overworked, underpaid, stressed, the chances of turning a blind eye or missing subtle cues increase dramatically. When profit motives override patient safety, the temptation to cover up or ignore warnings grows.
So the case highlights that individual monstrous acts are often amplified.
Not just by negligence, but by the very cracks in the system itself. The places where oversight is weak, where the culture implicitly discourages speaking up.
Until those underlying pressures are fully addressed.
The risk of a new angel of death emerging remains a very real and terrifying possibility.
A chilling thought.
This case truly forces us to confront deeply uncomfortable truths about human nature and about the systems we build to protect ourselves. I want to conclude with the profound, sobering words of presiding Judge Sebastian Berman from Högel's own sentencing.
Okay.
He called Högel's guilt unimaginable. A crime so vast it defies comprehension.
Unimaginable.
We also acknowledge with this note of weariness that the court, for all its efforts, could not dispel the fog for all the families desperately seeking truth and closure.
A testament to the lingering pain, the unanswered questions.
Absolutely. So what does this all mean for us? The case of Niels Högel stands as an eternal, stark reminder how fragile human life is, how easily one person, aided by the pervasive silence and systemic failures of many,
can become the most prolific serial killer in the peacetime history of an entire nation.
It prompts us to consider, where does responsibility truly lie when a system turns a blind eye? And what is our collective duty to ensure such a wall of silence never forms again around the guilt of others? #outro. That was a truly harrowing deep dive into a case that challenges our fundamental understanding of trust, accountability, and the dark corners human nature can hide. The story of Niels Högel is a stark, unforgettable reminder of the profound impact of institutional failures.
Indeed. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this case forces us to deeply reflect on the vulnerabilities within the very systems we rely on for our health, our safety, our well-being.
Yeah.
It raises an important question about how we as a society can ensure such a wall of silence, this collective turning of a blind eye, never forms again, allowing the guilt of others to fester unchecked.
And that's a question for us all to consider. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and keep seeking the truth.